So, good morning, everyone, and a happy 4th of July weekend. I hope you're all doing well and having an enjoyable and peaceful, restful, I hope, holiday weekend. And, thank you, Tracy. You're very welcome and glad you're here joining us for the second time. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Hugh Byrne, and I know many of you, but probably not everyone. I teach with the Insight Meditation Community, Washington, IMCW, and the Center for Mindful Living, which is a part of IMCW, but very much has its kind of a lot of own activities and community, and is a very warm and welcoming community, and many of the folks on here are a very key part of the Center for Mindful Living. Same can be said, of course, of IMCW. So I've been teaching with IMCW for 23 years or so, 2003, 22 years. And I haven't been teaching on the Sunday, I think, probably for 3 months, I think now. So I'm really, really happy to be back. I'll tell you a little bit of my story, but I'll include that in the talk rather than taking time on it now, because it fits very well with today's talk, which will be on the Buddha's teachings of the two arrows. That'll be familiar to some folks and maybe not to everyone, but it's a wonderful, I find it a wonderful teaching to kind of encapsulate the central teaching of the Buddha, which is the Four Noble Truths about suffering and how we can end suffering in our lives. And this is just I find it a very pithy and very, very cogent teaching. It can be very helpful. It's helpful to me in my practice and my life. Welcome to you all, and just a couple of words about just the format of the session. We normally begin with a meditation, maybe 20 minutes or so, guided meditation. Then I think Emily will lead us in some movement. Thank you, Emily, for doing that. It's always wonderful to get into our bodies, to not be disconnected from our bodies, and to, we spend so much time sitting down, and so it's really, really a key part of our practice. Then I'll share a talk today, as I mentioned, on these on the Buddha's teaching of the two arrows, and then hopefully we'll have some time. Excuse me, have some time for sharing after that. I don't have anything on immediately afterwards, so if we go, we'll finish formally at 12, to honor people's time. But if folks want to stay on a little bit longer, I'm happy to, and continue the conversation, because I hope it'll be a very rich discussion, where each of us experiences the second arrow or the third arrow or the fourth or many other arrows that we can add on to our primary experience. The Buddha teaches us, this and other wisdom teachings too, that our freedom really starts with opening to this moment as it is. And if we can open to this moment however it is, then there's freedom, because we're meeting life as it is. But as we know, a lot of the time we like some of our moments and we want more of them, and we dislike others and we want less of those. So we get into these kind of preferences and when those preferences get more than just preferences, but they're like, we got to have it this way, then we can get into a lot of suffering. So this is a teaching that really comes back to the central teaching of the Four Noble Truths. But before we get to that, Let's have a time of sitting together. Do a little bit of coughing for a moment. So just to begin, find a comfortable, relaxed posture. So sit in a way where your back is straight. You might invite the shoulders to relax. Let your hands settle wherever they're comfortable, on your lap or on your knees or on your thighs. You could, if you'd like to, let your eyes gently close, let the attention come inward. Consciously dropping out of the thinking mode, the planning and the to-dos and the responsibilities. Let those be to the side. You can be able to come back to them. You can let go of the future, let go of the past, and just be here. Let your attention drop down into your body. Feel the body where you are, on your chair or on your cushion, whatever you're touching. Feel the contact of your buttocks, your thighs with the surface beneath you. Feel the weight of your body, gravity pulling you down towards the earth. Feel the contact of your feet with the floor. See if you can feel that, the feelings from the inside. Maybe there's tingling, or pulsing, or throbbing, pressure, warmth, coolness, whatever's here. Similarly with the hands, whatever the hands are touching. If you can feel the hands from the inside. Again, there may be warmth or pressure or a tingling, pulsing. Feel the sensations of breathing. Breathing in and breathing out. And you might do just a brief scan of the body, beginning at your head, moving down through the face and the shoulders, down to the torso and to the lower body. And anywhere you notice there's any holding or tension, just invite that area to relax and soften. So you might pay attention to the area around the face and the eyes and the forehead, where we tend to hold a lot of tension. So inviting that area to relax, and the mouth, and the shoulders where we often hold tension. Imagine you've been holding a backpack and it's quite heavy. Just letting that, putting that aside, taking that off. And then the chest and the belly, the torso, where we often tighten up and hold tension. Just invite that area, the belly, the chest, to relax and be at ease. And the arms and the hands. Down abdomen, groin, down through the legs, thighs, calves, down to the feet. Just relaxing the body. Letting yourself be here in a way that's relaxed and at the same time alert. Just let your attention come to your breathing. And you might take a few longer, deeper breaths just to help you relax and arrive and settle. So a nice full deep in breath, filling the chest, filling the lungs. And a long, slow out breath, releasing, letting go of any tension or tightness or holding on the out breath. Breathing in, calming the body. Breathing out, calming the mind. We're just settling into being here. You might take a moment or two to gladden the mind and bring some joy or gladness into the mind. One way we can do this is by consciously inviting a smile or a half smile to the face, activating the muscles around your eyes and around your mouth. Imagine you're looking at somebody that you love or you care about, or a dear friend or a partner, loved one, or a pet. Just let that feeling, warmth, come down into your body, into your heart. You can always come back to the smile, helping relax the body, the mind. Just being here now with whatever you're experiencing, letting whatever is here be here, letting it come, letting it be, letting it go. Just everything coming and going in its own time. Maybe a bodily feeling comes, stays for a while and passes. Maybe an emotion, a feeling of peace or joy or sadness comes. As the Sufi poet Rumi says, welcome the guests, even if they're a crowd of sorrows, who sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. So whatever experiences, feelings, thoughts, sensations, memories, whatever comes, just see if you can welcome them. Let them come and go in their own time. And as a way of grounding your attention, just a help to being here, could just let your awareness rest gently on the experience of breathing. Feel the sensations of breathing in and breathing out. Feeling the cool air entering the nostrils, coming down into the chest and the belly, rising and falling. And the sensations of the warm air as you exhale. Just resting your attention on your breathing, if that's helpful to you. In breath and out breath. If it's helpful, you might just notice where you're most aware of the sensations of breathing and let your attention rest there. It might be at the nostrils, the upper lip, as the cool air enters and as you breathe out the warmer air. Or it might be at the chest, the belly, rising, falling with the in-breath and out-breath. And if it's helpful, you could just make a note of in and out, or rise, fall. Letting the breath help you incline the mind into being here rather than off somewhere in thought. And when you do notice that the mind has gone off, as it will at times, just gently and kindly come back to the body, come back to the breath. In, out, in breath, out breath. Poet Dorothy Hunt says, peace is this moment without judgment, this moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. Peace is this moment without judgment, this moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. Just notice where the attention is right now. And any time that you find you're caught up in thinking, memories, daydreams, plans, worries, just kindly and gently and without judgment, just come back again to this moment. Come out of the stories of the mind where we can spend so much of our time, and just come back to your direct experience, the body here, breathing, the feelings, the emotions, just this moment. Can this moment be a moment of peace, of joy, of presence? Finish with this poem by Donna Markova, I Will Not Die, An Unlived Life. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that which came to me as seed goes to the next as blossom, and that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit. Take your time coming back into a kind of the more outward going mode, looking mode. And welcome to those who joined during the meditation. Good to have you with us, and welcome everyone. Emily's going to lead us in some gentle movement for the next few minutes, and then we'll have today the talk for today on the 2 arrows. So over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Hugh. What a beautiful meditation. And I'd like to invite you to slowly sweep your arms. If you're standing up, just allow one heel to lift. As you turn to the other side, lifting the other heel, expanding out into the space. And then notice your eyes, which were closed before from the meditation and now open and aware. And then open up wide, expanding out, lifting the arms. Exhale, softening the shoulders. And then extend that left arm higher. Exhale down. Extending the right arm higher up. Exhale down. Now grasp the left wrist in your right hand and extend up and then over, allowing a C in the right side of your body, just curving in. Softening the right shoulder, softening the right elbow. Breathing in, relaxing, and then lifting up and switching your wrists, extending out over to the other side. Lengthening the right side of the body, breathing into the right side of the rib cage. Exhale, softening that left elbow. Then inhale up, extending your arms out. And now gather the energy underneath your arms. And with an exhale, let them drop. Shaking the body out, taking a moment. And we're going to move into a slight forward bend. This is a time for you to cultivate your choices, knowing your body as it is. Placing the hands on the hip crease, come into a flat back, your body parallel with the floor, just finding the length of your spine. And then allow your hands to drop down to above your knees, feeling the length of the back of the thighs. And if you'd like to, if your bones say yes, you could drop your head, lengthening the neck, dropping your arms down. Just being in the moment, either with a flat back or dropping the hands further down to release and relax. Deep breath into the back of the body. Exhale, last. Exhale down. And then placing your hands above your knees. Tuck your tailbone under. Start stacking the vertebrae, leaving your shoulders up around your ears, gathering the energy up from your feet. Inhale as you lift your arms up, exhaling them down. And then let's draw our hands into cactus arms. Exhale, dropping down. Inhale, rising up. Exhale, dropping down. Inhale, rise. Extending the arms out, flip that left palm up. Turn the right thumb down. Notice the length of your two arms as an extension of your focus on the left. And then switch over to look at the right palm up, turning the left thumb down. Extending out to the left again, right thumb down. Back to the right. And then drop the arms down, roll your shoulders back. And then roll them individually. And then open up your arms if you'd like. Expanding the space, your awareness, and switch to go the other way. And then we'll just shake it out. And the last move will be lifting up our arms, placing the palms together, and moving to the heart space. And then turning our attention out to everyone here, noticing the presence of our friends, our community, and then turning our hands down towards the earth, appreciating all that it gives. And now we're going to lift up with an exhale. So, whoosh, back to above our heads, down to the heart. And take a bow, everyone. Thank you for your practice. So good to see you.
Thank you, Emily. That's wonderful. Well, we're ready to sit again. So as I mentioned at the outset, beginning, the talk today will be on the Buddha's teachings about the two arrows. And I begin with the first of the Buddha's teachings after his awakening. Probably many of you know the story, maybe at least in outline, of, the Siddhartha who became the Buddha, or the awakened one. A Buddha means awakened one who is awakened to the full possibilities of this human life. That, he lived a life of luxury, had everything he could possibly need, but there was something he sensed was missing, and he left this very luxurious, wealthy life to become a wandering mendicant, a wandering monastic, with owning nothing but the clothes, the robes that he wore and a begging bowl, etc. And he studied with leading teachers of his time, wanting to find, is there an end to suffering in this life? That was his kind of central question. And the need, that's kind of a deep need, a deep searching for the answer to this question. He didn't find the answer with these teachers, even though he learned all they had to offer. And then he embarked on this, these very painful ascetic practices that people still do a lot in the, Indian subcontinent. You'll see the sadhus, the holy men and women, who doing these very austere practices. And that's the path that the Siddhartha, who became the Buddha, followed, punishing the body in order to free the spirit or the soul or whatever was the theory of the case. But he lived, he starved himself and was very close to death, and really had this, an intense determination, but it wasn't at that stage a skillful practice. And I've told, I've shared in other talks, and probably other teachers have shared, of how he realizes that this isn't the way. You don't find awakening through beating on the body and punishing the body. The body isn't the problem. You awaken in the body. We know, I think, hopefully know this, but a lot of people have to go down that austere path first. But what he realized, that wasn't the path to freedom, and he then, continued with his determination, but ate food, and he sat down. The famous kind of story of sitting under the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening, and being, on a full moon night about 2,500 years ago, seeing, the truth, seeing, where suffering comes from, and really understanding that deeply, and understanding it so deeply that it kind of, in a way, burned away all of the possibilities for suffering arising again. He experienced the deepest freedom, and he then, soon after, began a course of teaching, of which he continued for 45 years until he died. But the first of his teachings was to the group of practitioners who had practiced with him, these 5 ascetics. The story is that they practiced together, and they all did these very, painful practices of going out in the cold with no clothes on, and the heat of the day, and living on 1 grain of rice a day. He talks about that. And he realizes that that's not the path, and he leaves them, and they think that he's gone off the path. But he goes back, and he decides they will be the first practitioners that he'll teach to. And at first they're very skeptical of him, because he didn't follow the path of austerity, But they realize something has changed, there's been a profound transformation in Siddhartha. And they sit down and listen to his teachings. And the first teachings he gives are on the 4 Noble Truths. It's a sutta or discourse, the Dhammacakkavartana in Pali, but the discourse on turning the wheel of the Dharma. And it's the beginning of a whole new era of teachings. In Buddhist cosmology, just a little bit of an aside, there's the understanding that, there's been different Buddhas through history, going back through the ages. And a new Buddha comes along when the teachings of the previous Buddha have fallen away and people don't have access to them anymore. And a Buddha is somebody who comes to awakening on their own, through their own practice, rather than through a teacher. You have greatly awakened people, but who have followed, the teachings of, Ajahn Chah, or, whatever great teachers in the past, Thich Nhat Hanh or whoever, Dalai Lama. Happy birthday, happy 90th birthday to the Dalai Lama. But a Buddha is one who comes to awakening on through their own practice. Anyway, that's the cosmology. You don't have to believe all that. And there's a wonderful, healthy debate between in Buddhism. There's some of you may know of Stephen Batchelor, a wonderful English teacher who's practiced for probably 40 or 50 years now in many different traditions. But his view is that you can have Buddhism without beliefs. And that's the name of one of his celebrated books, Buddhism Without Beliefs. And you don't have to believe in not beliefs either. but that's his view is you don't need the story I told you just now, the cosmology about the Buddhas coming along. He would say that doesn't really impact on suffering and the end of suffering. It's neither here nor there. It's a kind of a belief. It's like in the Tibetan Buddhism that a new Dalai Lama will come along and reveal him or herself through certain signs and all of that. People who would call themselves Buddhists or followers of the Buddhist path, at least, might say, I'm agnostic about that. I'm pretty agnostic about all that stuff myself. I don't disbelieve it, but it's something I don't feel is central to to the key goal of the path, which is to end suffering in our lives. So coming back from that somewhat digression into cosmology, the Buddha. So the Buddha's teachings of the Four Noble Truths begin with the truth of suffering. Our task is to recognize when suffering is present, and suffering is really anything that's an unpleasant or unwelcome experience. It could be pain, could be illness, could be not getting what we want to get or getting what we don't want to get. Some experience that's undesired, unpleasant, not liked, not wanted. And it can range from the annoyance of being caught in a traffic jam, stuck in a traffic jam. That can be experienced as suffering, just as having a chronic illness or losing a loved one, which would be a much more serious thing. That would also be an example of suffering. Gil Fronsdal, who teaches out on the West Coast, Spirit Rock and Redwood City, he talks about the origin of the word for suffering in the Pali language is dukkha, D-U-K-K-H-A. And he says du means bad, and K-H-A means like the axle of a wheel. So you can think of suffering as like being a wheel that's not turning around properly. It's off kilter, as it were. So that experience of suffering, that is the first noble truth. Philip Moffat, who wrote a wonderful book, probably the kind of a major book on the Four Noble Truths, at least in the last 25 years or so, his book, Dancing with Life. I recommend it strongly. I know some of you have read it, and it's a wonderful, wonderful book on the Four Noble Truths. He says dukkha, or suffering, is an unavoidable reality of ordinary human existence. Underline ordinary human existence, that is to be known and responded to wisely. So what he's saying there is, with ordinary human existence, is suffering isn't inevitable. If suffering was inevitable, what would be the point? I mean, that you couldn't find an end to suffering. If suffering was always here, it was just like part of life, then there wouldn't be an end to suffering. But the whole essence of the Buddha's teachings is there is an end to suffering. We can find freedom from suffering in this very life. So Philip says it's an unavoidable reality of ordinary human existence. It's how we humans typically respond to unliked or undesired experience until we see there's another way, there's a deeper truth. So that's the first noble truth is the truth of suffering. And our task really is to recognize when suffering is present, because if we don't recognize we're suffering, we're just going to keep on. We could be complaining about things. Oh, this is terrible, and isn't these politicians, aren't they terrible, and they're doing awful things, and they're terrible. We could be doing all of that and not recognizing that that's suffering. If we're complaining in that way about things, we are suffering. I don't see any way you can be doing that. You're basically saying reality isn't okay. That's a very different thing than saying, looking at harmful things happening and saying, those are harmful things. That's a very different thing. I'm talking about complaining. Oh, this is like this, and oh, this is like. I think we know the difference between discernment on one hand and complaining on the other. But that complaining is suffering, and that's so. Our task is to recognize when suffering is present. And the second of the noble truths is really crucial. The Buddha taught that the cause of suffering is clinging. We're holding on to something. We're clinging. The word in Pali is tanha, T-A-N-H-A, which literally translates as thirst. So it's like a thirst, a wanting. So other words would be grasping, wanting, craving for things to be the way we want them to be. So we're wanting what we like. We're wanting to get rid of what we don't like. And that clinging is the cause of suffering. It's like wanting things, holding on in that way. It's not like a wholesome desire. If you want to think about, I think I'm going to go for lunch with my friend and I'm going to have a nice quiche Lorraine or whatever it might be, a vindaloo curry, whatever, and you look forward to that and you have a desire for that, that's not a problem. But if you get to the restaurant and they don't have what you want and you get bummed out about it and complain about it, oh God, I so much wanted to have that, then that's a kind of signal that there's suffering there. So wholesome desire is fine. Where desire is an energy of life, but it's when we cling, it's the clinging that's the problem. So the key to the second noble truth is to recognize that when we're suffering, there's something that we're doing. We're resisting life as it is, resisting how things are. We're wanting things to be different. So the essence of suffering is really this wanting reality to be different than it is. I want the things that I want. I don't want the things that I don't want. And when there's that clinging, there's suffering. You could think of it as the gap between how things are and how we want them to be. If there's a gap between how things are, I wanted it to be a sunny day because I had these plans and now it's raining. Oh, ruin my day. If you're in that kind of place where there's a gap between how things are and how we want them to be, then that's suffering. In that gap is suffering. And in order to free ourselves from suffering, we need to recognize that clinging is present and to let go. So we need to have the clarity to say, okay, let's say somebody in your life did something to you, harmed you, did something that was painful or harmful to you. If you keep on holding on to that with a sense of blame or judgment, I'll never forgive that person. They did those things to me. And, I'm not saying that it's okay hypothetically what it was. It could be something really, really harmful. But if we're holding on to that hatred or blame or judgment, then it's like we're holding on to a hot coal, and we're the ones that are suffering. If you hate a politician, you think, I won't name names, but you think of your favorite politician that you dislike or you hate, and you kind of keep, solidifying that person. What a terrible person. How could they do that? how selfish they could be. And they come from this tradition, and yet they still do these hateful, cruel things. If you're caught up in that, then you're suffering. It's having zilch effect on the person. They don't even know that this is going on, but you're holding on in that way. So we have to see clearly that the suffering that's caused by our clinging, and then we can let go. Ajahn Chah, the great Thai teacher of the late 20th century, he says, let go a little and you'll experience a little peace. Let go a lot and you'll experience a lot of peace, a lot of freedom. Let go completely and you'll experience complete peace, complete freedom. Your struggle with the world will be at an end. So our task really is to see how we're holding on, where we're holding on, and to let go. So we could state the essence of these Four Noble Truths in this way. When we cling, we suffer. When we let go of clinging, we let go of suffering. We find freedom. Clinging leads to suffering. Letting go of clinging leads to letting go of suffering and experiencing freedom. And the fourth noble truth is the path that leads to the end of suffering, the eightfold path, the training in ethics, in wisdom, in meditation. So this is, I'd share all that about the Four Noble Truths, just a kind of a short version of that, because it encapsulates the teaching I want to look at today in more depth and look at our own experience of it. And this is the teaching, it's another sutta, another discourse. It's called the Discourse on the Arrow, or the talk, or the teaching on the arrow. It's also talked about as a dart, it could be translated as Salata, S-A-L-L-A-T-H-A sutta, the sutta or the discourse on the arrow or the dart. And the Buddha begins this teaching on the arrow or the arrows by saying to his followers, he says, an ordinary person, who he calls an uninstructed worldling. It sounds like something out of The Hobbit. Uninstructed worldling, a worldly person who hasn't had any training in Dharma, in the teachings of the Dharma. He says, an ordinary person experiences pleasant things, unpleasant things, and things that are neither pleasant nor unpleasant. And then he says, a follower of the Dharma, which he calls a well-instructed follower of the path, a well-instructed follower, somebody who's trained in the teachings, also experiences pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and neither pleasant or, in between. What Jerry would call fair to middling. Fair to middling. Something in the middle, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. And so he says to his followers, he says, what's the difference between them? They both experience pleasant things, a Buddha and a, somebody who hasn't had any training, both experience the same things. They experience pleasant things, they experience unpleasant things, they experience things that are kind of neither, somewhere in between. And they respond, wisely they respond by saying, we'd like to hear your answer on this. And he agrees to explain. That's the Buddha explains the difference. And this is how he explains the difference. He says, when the ordinary person experiences something unpleasant or painful, it's like they are being hit with an arrow, that painful experience. But they're also immediately being hit with a second arrow. How are they being hit with a second arrow? Well, they typically respond by feeling they don't like the first arrow, so they try to get away from the first arrow, get away from the painful feeling by searching for pleasant feelings. pleasant things. But these pleasant things actually don't provide real happiness or real relief. And so by trying to avoid the feeling of the first arrow, the painful feeling of the first arrow, they go searching for something that will make them feel good. But that doesn't give a lasting satisfaction. So it's like they're being hit by a second arrow, because their arrow of pain, they're adding to that the arrow of suffering. Wanting things to be different, but not being able to make them things different than they are, because the nature of things is that they are as they are. So this person, this ordinary person, this uninstructed worldling, it's like when a bad thing happens, or when they don't get a good thing happening, it's like they're hit by two arrows. So it's extra painful, pain plus the extra pain or suffering of the second arrow. So how is it different for the well-instructed follower of the Dharma, somebody who's practiced, who's, trained in the teachings and the practices of the Dharma? Well, this person, the trained follower, experiences the difficult or painful feeling, that first arrow. They don't immediately, when they feel that first arrow, they don't immediately search for relief in pleasant things, because they know that relief isn't found in that way. That relief is actually found by being willing to be with the pain of the first arrow and know that it's only going to last a limited time, that it's impermanent. They know that that first arrow is impermanent. The pain, the difficult feeling of that first arrow is impermanent. So the trained follower doesn't add a second arrow to the first arrow, and is able to find relief and happiness in the present moment by feeling that ouch of the first arrow. Ouch. Yes, I am. It hurts that, this relationship has ended that I've been involved in for a long time, hypothetically. That's a painful thing. But if we can stay with that rather than what would we normally do. I remember when my first major relationship came to an end, I was, it was terribly, terribly sad, and it was painful, really, really painful. So what did I do? I went down to the pub and had lots of pints of beer and took other substances. This was in my 20s, so a long time ago, and took other substances to dull the pain. That was something, that I didn't have any other skills to do it another way. And I had the gift of being brought up in a culture going back many hundreds of years where you solve, if bad things happen, then you have a drink. If good things happen, you have a drink. But particularly you dull pain in that way. And you don't have to feel the emotion that you'd otherwise have to feel. So in that way, adding that second arrow, but I can't guarantee, if I were in the same situation again, I wouldn't respond in that way. Hopefully I'd respond in a more skillful way, but it almost certainly wouldn't be through substances. It might be some other unskillful way. And I'm going to talk about some unskillful ways we can deal with things in a minute. So the trained follower doesn't add the second arrow. And so can find relief in just in recognizing the impermanence of all experiences. This is painful, but it's not going to last forever. And if I can open to it and allow it, then it can come and go in its own time. those difficult feelings. So you can look at it this way. The first arrow is the nature of life. There will be birth, sickness, aging, death, loss of what's dear to us, not getting what we'd like to get. And if we can learn to stay with the first arrow, to say yes to what is, to meet what's present with, Tara Brach uses the phrase radical acceptance, deep-rooted, wholehearted acceptance of what is present. It may not be what we wanted, but this is what's here. Saying yes to what is, saying yes to what is present. Now, I share occasionally the Jesuit teacher and philosopher Anthony de Mello, who talks about enlightenment, speaks of enlightenment as absolute cooperation with the inevitable. Absolute cooperation with the inevitable. That's really what we're being asked to do, is to cooperate with what we don't really have any choice to cooperate with. It's reality. But we often, our tendency is not to cooperate with reality, but to fight it, to want reality to be different than it is. So all of these things, birth, sickness, aging, death, typically we respond to them as suffering. These are not things that we want, or the pain associated with them is not what we want. But all of these can be experienced without suffering. You know, we could even have a painful death, but without suffering, where there's physical pain, but there isn't that suffering of resistance to what's present. So this teaching is expressed in the well-known teaching about the arrows, is expressed in the well-known adage, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. You've heard, probably most of you have heard of that. The pain is inevitable. Life, will bring with it pain at times. But suffering, it involves the resistance. Suffering involves clinging. And that's the part that we can let go of. So let's take a simple example. We're stuck in traffic and we have an important appointment that we don't want to be late for. Now, if we can simply accept that traffic is moving slowly, then it doesn't need to be a problem. Suffering isn't inevitable in that situation, even if we're wanting to get somewhere and be on time for an important appointment. Typically, the temperature in the car is fine. Nobody's torturing us. Nobody's sticking needles in us. Typically that situation. And yet it can be one of profound suffering. It's like, oh my God, they're going to think terrible things about me, and all the stuff that the mind can create around the situation. But the actual situation is just like, well, traffic's moving slowly. The air conditioner is working most of the time, presumably. It's not that terrible, but the mind is making it into, can make it into a terrible thing. So this is that. It's adding that, this should be different. Why is this happening now? Of all times, when I'm having this important appointment, why now? I'm such a jerk. I should have got ready earlier. All of these ways in which we judge ourselves, or we judge others, or we judge the world, or we fight with the way things are. This part is optional, but it's but it's so easy to be caught up in creating second and sometimes third and fourth arrows. Sometimes, just so that I don't want to just use a simple example of being stuck in traffic when we got an appointment. Sometimes first arrows can be very painful. For example, if we're experiencing a chronic pain or a loss of a loved one, there's pain, there's sadness, there's grief. But even in this situation, we have a choice about whether we add anything to it. We add, why me? Why now? Why this? It's not fair. Others don't have things as hard as I do. It's that add-ons. We always have that choice about those add-ons. Those are the second and third and fourth arrows. And when we're not adding anything to the first arrow, whether it's a relatively, not that intense an experience, or whether it's an extremely difficult experience, if we don't add anything, we don't add suffering. This is the teaching. I had a recent example of a second arrow, maybe third and fourth and fifth as well. I'll tell you my story. I began the year 2025, and this new administration that we're all experiencing such joy with, ho, ho, ho. I began the year with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, even though, recognizing things were going to be pretty intense. I started with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and I took on a lot of things, a lot of teaching, a lot of responsibilities, a lot of organizing things. And for a while, things went slowly. But when the amount of responsibilities I'd taken on came into conflict with lower levels of energy, maybe some slowing that comes with aging, if I'm honest about it. And also, I think being affected by what was happening, what is happening, has been happening, in the country, particularly the cruelty, the inhumanity, the othering of, individuals and groups of people. I think that was definitely having an effect on me. And things started to become much more difficult. And, basically what I was experiencing, I was feeling really tired, mentally and physically tired. I was feeling like I had very little fuel in the tank, as the proverbial tank, like reaching in for energy, but there was very little energy there. And things felt much more of a challenge. And I found it difficult to access, even to be creative and have energy for kind of like doing things, because the energy just wasn't there. Even in areas like teaching that I'd been doing for 25 years, it wasn't easy to do. It was like everything seemed like a big burden, it seemed like a big hill to climb, even though some of these things were things I would normally do, at the drop of a hat. But once you get into those really contracted places, it's like sometimes one more email can be the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's like, it's like if you're in that really tight place. And here's what happened. Rather than just staying with the first arrow of exhaustion and recognizing I'm just really exhausted, and perhaps taking a couple of weeks off, where I went to was I tried to solve things in my head, which I've done before, tried to kind of force a solution by keeping on pushing, just pushing ahead. I wasn't accepting the first arrow. I was saying in my mind, this shouldn't be happening now. This is the worst possible time for me to hit the proverbial wall. And so I tried to keep on going. But one thing you learn in these kind of situations is that when you fight with reality, there's only one foreseeable outcome. And if there's anything I'd love you to take away from this talk today is, if you fight with reality, there's only one foreseeable outcome. And that is that reality will win out. We might want reality to be different. We might want a different administration or different policies, or we might want different aspects of our life to be different. But they are as they are. Reality is as it is. And when we fight with reality, one thing is clear: we'll suffer. And when you keep on pushing your body, staying up later, not getting sufficient sleep, skipping meals, not going to the gym or getting other exercise, not staying in touch with friends and loved ones, at a certain point, the body and the mind, because it's really the mind body, will tell you time's up. You know, it will get to the place where the body will, you know, if you push it hard enough, the body will just collapse and will say, I'm not going on anymore. And it's really the body mind, but we'll talk about the body. You know, you've probably heard of, maybe read the books, you know, The Body Bears the Burden, you know, particularly around trauma. The body bears the burden, the body keeps the score. And it does. The body, the cells hold all of this stuff. And much as the mind may want to push on, you know, with all the second arrows, resisting, I'm going to keep on going. At a certain point, it's going to say, no, time's up. You know, that was my experience over the last couple of months. I tried to keep on pushing, but at a certain point, I couldn't push anymore. Now, you know, and the thing is, if you don't catch it early on, the price you pay is going to tend to be a lot higher. Rather than having to take 2 weeks off, you might need to take 2 months off, you know, and just to be able, you know, and you know, for me, there was a lot of painful soul searching for why I didn't, you know, listen for the cues before, rather than just keep pushing and pushing. It's a powerful teaching to this teaching of the second arrow and the third arrow and all the arrows we add on, because after going through the suffering of it, you definitely don't want to go through it again. So it's a powerful teaching in that way. But you could say a more skillful way of avoiding the suffering is to prevent the arising of, well, the Buddha talks about it as preventing the arising of unarisen, unskillful states. It's a kind of complex way of saying it. But if they haven't yet arisen, it's like, you know, if you're in recovery and you know, regularly went to, you know, for alcohol, and you regularly went to a bar, wouldn't it be much better that you're walking down the road and the mind is saying, oh, I could go to see, just for a few minutes, to go see my old buddies in the bar, and you recognize in you know, deeper, wise mind knows that if you get in there again, the chances are you might to start drinking again. So if you can say, I'm going to take that other road that takes me around, that takes me a long way away from the bar, rather than going in there and maybe having to say, no, I'm just come to say hello, I'm not going to have a drink. And everybody tells you, you know, oh, come on, just one, you know, for old time's sake. You know, the first one, you know, going round the block is a much better approach than actually finding ourselves in the situation where we have to either avoid it when it's right there in your face, or avoid it when you are already kind of going down, you know, revolving down the rabbit hole, you know, in that way. These, by the way, those two, preventing the arising of the unskillful state and abandoning them when it has arisen, are actually two of the four wise efforts in the Eightfold Path. The others are around skillful states, cultivating unarisen skillful ones that haven't yet arisen, bringing them into cultivation, and then deepening them when they have arisen. These are the four. But the two I've been focusing on are just the prevention and then the abandoning. So, you know, preventing would include planning in advance, knowing where one's triggers are, you know, where one is likely to get caught up, in my situation, into just keep on pushing, being prepared, taking care of oneself, you know, making sure you do get right sleep, exercise, diet, etc., etc. and watching out for this, for the reminders. When I've been in this place before, it's the image I have is being on a freeway, and you've got all these off ramps. I could take that off ramp, but rather than taking the off ramp, I keep on driving, and driving and driving, and that's part of my patterning that I've had to kind of work with over the years. My mother brought up 9 kids, and she had an extraordinary determination, and it was an admirable quality. But I think I probably took it on in unskillful ways, of just kind of, you always got to kind of keep on going, but you can't. That's, just, you have to have that humility at a certain point to say no, and that's, a great gift if you can do that.